Okay, now I mentioned in Blender, I'd like you to avoid learning a bunch of hotkeys if we can. But I do want you to get familiarized with some of those shortcuts that are going to make mousing around in the menus kind of much less preferable than just knowing a key on the keyboard to press, especially as we're moving things around and adjusting things. You don't always want to interrupt the middle of your action with clicking somewhere else. So along with that goes navigation, and I'd like you to familiarize yourself with how to orbit around, zoom in, and pan around, just like we did in Quixel Mixer. So I really hope everyone has a 3-button mouse. I've got a little guide that'll show up down here with what I'm clicking and what I'm typing. If you don't have a 3-button mouse, you might have to experiment with your touchpad and see kind of what works. Might be kind of gesture operations and multi-finger operations. So the first thing let's try out is an orbit. I'm going to click down on the middle mouse wheel button and drag left, right, up, down, and we can see that's how we orbit around our current focus of our area. If I want to pan around, if I hold down Shift and click that middle mouse wheel button, we can pan around, up, down, left, right again. To zoom in, scrolling the mouse wheel, it's kind of always the way I've done it, but you can also hold down Control and click and drag with that mouse wheel. Okay, so there's your navigation. Okay, I want to talk about some menus that will often appear on the left and right of, especially in your 3D viewport, but some other viewports as well. And that's the Tools panel and the Properties panel. So the Tools panel is an easy one to remember. Our first hotkey here is going to be T on the keyboard. You can see these tools open up. Here in object mode, we don't have a ton of tools, but they still are going to be helpful things for us to be aware of. So to close it, we can hit T again. Over here on the right, I'd like to see my Properties panel. So if I hit N on the keyboard, you can see all of these little tabs come up. It's a lot of information that maybe you won't have on your copy of Blender if you don't have some of these add-ons on. But this item and view are going to be really useful things for us to be aware of if we're to change when we need them. So if I hit N again, it should go away. Now while we did install and made sure the gizmo was active in our default document in Blender, I do want to show you what shortcuts are used to do these same things in case, again, clicking isn't an option. And that first one is going to be move. And along with move, rotate, and scale, we want to think about the 3 axes of our viewport. And the first axis we want to talk about is X. And it's this red line here that's representing the X direction. Okay, the other axis we want to talk about is going to be Y, and it's this green one in Blender. Okay, it's going in this direction, perpendicular from X. And then, let's see if we can look at things from another angle. Z is going to be the blue one here, moving up and down. And if we orbit around, you can see the gizmo sort of suggests that the blue is pointing up. Okay, and that's going to be our Z axis, which is perpendicular to the X and Y. So I mention those because when we combine our axes commands with our move, rotate, and scale, we're going to get a lot more precision and kind of expected results. So let's start with move. Move, this really comes from grab, if we wanted to think of the hotkey as an abbreviation for the action. So if we hit G on the keyboard, G for grab, and if we just move it around, you see it's going to move in any old place. I can constrain this to a specific axis now without clicking again. I'm going to type in Z, and now we can see we've constrained that to the Z axis. Or we could press X and constrain it to the X axis, or Y and constrain it to the Y axis. I'm going to hit escape, just go back to the middle there. I didn't make any changes. I hit escape, so I canceled the current command. Now let's try R for rotate. That's an easy one to remember. And if I hit R, you can see it's kind of spinning whichever way it wants, kind of based on our current viewport. If I hit Z, it's going to constrain it to rotating around the Z axis, as if it was kind of on a skewer made of Z axis. Okay, we can also change that to X, and now we can see it's rotating around the X axis, and then Y, rotating around the Y axis. Okay, the next one is scale, and it is simply S. So if I hit S on the keyboard, everything will scale proportionally, X, Y, and Z directions proportionally. If I want to limit that to X, we can see it's going to grow in the X direction or shrink in the X direction. If I hit Y, it's going to grow in the Y direction or shrink in the Y direction. And Z, See it growing up or growing down. Now these same things can be achieved again with our gizmo. You can rotate, and you can see how the colors now coordinate to those same axes. So if we want to rotate around the y-axis, we're going to grab that green arc. Or we can grab the blue one for the z. If we want it to scale just in the y-axis, we can grab that green one. Or move in the y-axis, we just want to grab that green one. So the gizmo is doing the same thing, but those hotkeys are going to be helpful for you to have. Okay, a few more hotkeys here. And that's going to be kind of how to access some of the common commands outside of rotate, scale, move. So if we click on something and decide we don't want it anymore, we can hit X on the keyboard, and Blender's going to prompt us to see if we really want to delete it. So X is for delete, and we can hit OK. Now if we want to get that cube back, we could have always, of course, hit Control Z, just like most software. If we want to redo something instead of undo something, we can hit Control Shift Z to take it back. Control Z to undo it. Control Shift C to redo a command. If we want to select the rest of the objects here, we could, by default, with our marquee, grab them. Okay, if I want to grab both of them, I can hold down Shift, and with Shift still selected on the keyboard, grab this other piece, and now we've got both of these objects selected. Now what if there was like just a ton of objects, and doing that was like, you know, a lot of work. We want to make sure we get everything in the scene. How do we select all of them? I'm going to hit A on the keyboard, and that's going to select everything. So now I can hit X and delete that. So we've got nothing left in our scene, and you can see up here in the collections panel that sure enough, we've just got an empty collection. So how do we add things back? Let's hold down Shift on the keyboard and A. And now we get this panel that pops up wherever our cursor is, and it's going to show us all of the little things we can add into Blender. And by default, we started with that cube, so let's bring it back, the cube here. Okay, so that was again with Shift A. If we want to bring our light back, we can hit Shift A again, go to light, and point light. Let's go ahead and move that up. We can practice some things. So G, Z, up, and let's move it over in the Y direction, G, Y. Now let's bring that camera back. So Shift A, I'm going to come down here to camera, and let's try the gimbal now, or the gizmo. Click on this Y arrow, can drag it back, and it's a little hard to see. We might have to orbit around holding the middle mouse wheel button, and drag this way. And last, let's click and drag the Z axis. So our scene is kind of back to where it was. Maybe the camera's pointing a slightly different direction, but that is a little bit more about hotkeys and navigation in Blender.